And I knew I wanted to be a TV writer at that point. So I had switched from wanting to become a director, hit Stargate. That inspired me to become a writer. 6 years later, I got a job on Travelers, created by Brad Wright, who created the Stargate franchise. And in that 6 years between Stargate Universe and Travelers, I learned how to make TV really, really, really well. I knew the ins and outs of it. I know how to produce. Unfortunately, on Travelers, he had already staffed the writers' room. And I'm not going to get into like how the show was developed because that's a crazy long story. But the point is, he had 4 writers. He needed an assistant and script coordinator and somebody to do legal clearances. And I was like, okay, well, I used to do all of that and I need the money. I need to work. So I'll do all 3 of those jobs, pay me more than I would normally get, and read my pilot though. I want to become a writer and I just want to learn more about this. Very quickly, Brad realized that I knew more about TV production than any of his writers. And within 2 or 3 months, he made me a story editor. And I was working in the writer's room for the second half of the season. I didn't write any scripts in the first season, but I was there breaking story and weighing in on things while still doing all of my other jobs, right? But that's what it takes in this industry. You have to just keep, being the person that shows up and delivers. And I think it was like Jeffrey Katzenberg was like, if you don't plan on coming in on Saturday, don't bother coming in on Sunday. And you kind of have to have that attitude of like, I'm going to work harder and more than anyone else because it's super competitive. What am I willing to do to get this job? And then I was a story editor on Traveler season 1. Season 2, I co-wrote 2 scripts and I solo wrote the season finale, which is, in writing terms, that's kind of a big deal when the showrunner gives you the finale script to write. And that was just an amazing experience. And Brad trusted me with that. And then in season 3, I wrote 2 more scripts solo. And then one of those scripts got nominated for a Writers Guild Award. So Travelers was just the best experience, the best job in the world. It was getting to do what I was inspired to do, on Stargate, was show up at 9, leave at 6 on a prep day and talk about imaginary people all day. And just talk about characters. It's kind of like a weird therapy session when you're in a writer's room. You're just like, what would they do? What do they think? Well, no. David would never do that. David would. This is the type of guy David is, and it's such a great experience.
What is something about being a TV writer that most people wouldn't even think of?
Yeah, the thing that people are often surprised about is how collaborative process is, right? Like if you want to just write alone and own whatever you're writing and have total control of it, become a screenwriter, a feature writer. But if you want to, well, it's not if you want to, you have to, as a TV writer, learn how to work with other people. Because unless you're Taylor Sheridan, who writes every single episode of the shows that he's making, or Tyler Perry, right? It's possible. I don't think that their shows are better for being solo written. I think that like TV is meant to be a collaborative endeavor. And when you have 10 episodes, you're having, 6, 7, 8 different brains in the room trying to come up with a story is going to be better than one brain. And it all gets filtered through the showrunner. And so like the final say of what happens is still the showrunner, and the final pass of the script is still going to be the showrunner. But having a group of people come together and craft story all in service of the showrunner's vision is a really cool process. It's a lot of fun. It's also just easier. Writing a feature alone for months is very difficult, and it's frustrating.
Very solo affair.
Yeah. There's nobody to just like bounce ideas off of, right? And in a writer's room, though, while other people are talking, you are coming up with another pitch that might work. Or my favorite thing about working with a writing partner, or within a group, is the bad pitches often lead to good pitches. I love bad pitches. I love knowing what the thing isn't, because it so many times it inspires me and helps me find what the good pitch actually is.
There's that process called breaking story. And what is that like? What's it like to break story in a TV writer's room?
Where do we start? So usually when you have an episode, somebody will probably have come in with a pitch for like the core of the episode. I'll use my own episodes as an example. I knew that I wanted to do an episode in season 3 of Travelers, sort of like pulling the cover off of like a Fox News type thing, because I was just so tired of the propaganda and the lies that are being spewed, across all mainstream media in some way. And I was like, well, wouldn't it be cool if like Sean Hannity just one day said, it's all bullshit. Everything I'm saying is a lie. It's all just for the money. And like, look at me, I'm rich. And in Travelers, we had an opportunity to do that because of the conceit of the show of like a traveler from the future is pretending to be a person. It's a body snatchers series, basically, right?
Right.
And I was like, well, what if that traveler ended up revealing the truth on air? What would that look like? And so then we got to craft this story and do a lot of research that way. But in terms of breaking the story, we knew what the show engine was, right? And so you always know like, okay, by the end of Act 1, we really have to introduce what the main like mission is going to be, what the conflict is that leads to the mission. But then in every act, because we had 5 characters, we wanted to make sure that we had in the teaser and Act 1, home beats, what we call like the personal storylines. So what's the personal storyline for Carly here? And where's it going to start and where's it going to end? And so then we kind of had the structure that we follow for the show. And we know that because, it was a Netflix series. And at the time, Netflix, they weren't very like hands-on with the show at all, but they did really want what they called like the WTF ending, right? The whole like the shocking moment that has you click next episode at 3 a.m. and you can't stop watching, the binging button, right? And so we had to always have that sort of ending in mind. But as far as breaking, yeah, 5 different people in the room, including the showrunner, with 5 different experiences and personalities, and people just brought ideas, and Brad would often be the one saying, nope, that doesn't work. Oh, I like that. Let's explore that. Sometimes we would go down rabbit holes for like 3 hours just talking about the rules of time travel. It's fun. By the end of the day, you're exhausted. You just turn on like a reality TV show because you just can't really think too much more. But it's
Right.
10 hours of just sitting and thinking about how to craft the best story possible.
Interesting. And then because you're going to be the quote unquote writer of that episode, you're sort of taking all these ideas that everybody's presenting, and as you're saying, there's a skeleton for how the show needs to work.
Yeah, so as we're breaking, if an idea is good enough to make it onto the board, right? We're basically sitting in front of a whiteboard that has a bunch of boxes on it. So, one for the teaser and then boxes for acts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as we're structuring the show and a scene comes into focus and Brad says, "Yep, that's great. That's a scene. Let's put it on the board." Then we write that on the board and then we have an outline for the episode. That board outline then turns into a real like written outline, just like a Word document that just helps fill in a lot of those gaps that weren't on the board. Because for example, I can have a scene on the board that says like Jeff gets arrested. Okay, well, what's the scene? Like I know what's supposed to happen, but what actually happens? And so then that's my job as a writer to fill that in. And then at that point, from an outline, then we go to script. And that's literally typing out like the description and the dialogue, the scene headings, the transitions, and creating this document that will be shot. That's the other cool part about when you're working on a TV show versus when you're just in development on your own thing. You know that like whatever you're typing is going to be said out loud by these, beautiful actors on set, and it's going to be seen by millions of people on Netflix. It's a very, very interesting feeling.
It's a very tight timeline too, isn't it? From that like breaking story, because well, especially in Canadian television, it seems like the timeline between what we're just talking about now and that episode actually being shot is quite short, isn't it?
Generally speaking, yeah, but we were very lucky on Travelers. Brad, he has so much experience, right? Like as a showrunner, I think over 500 hours of produced television. And so it's pretty amazing to work with him and see how he schedules the room. Well, just being efficient in general, right? And so to give an example, I think it was like my season 2 finale episode. I started to write it in April of 2017, and it wasn't going into production until the end of June. And so I had a
Okay.
long time to write that script. Like I had 2 weeks for the first draft, and then we did notes, and then I had another week to do those notes, and then yet another round of notes. Where like I have friends that work in network TV, and they have to write a script in 5 days, and like it has to go then to production and get ready to be prepped because that's just how far behind they are. And often they don't even get to write the first draft on their own. They have to like tag team it with all the other writers. So everybody writes an act in a day. They put all the script together and then they do their pass to like polish it up, and that's how they get it out. But on Travelers we had so much time, and that was because of Brad and just knowing how
Right.
to break story and be efficient and get it done. It was really cool.
That's also a bit of like that the network has that trust in Brad to get you guys started earlier, right? Like you're it because obviously it's like the writers room opens up based on the money being greenlit. Like the season's been greenlit, and then that's when you open up the writers room. But
Yeah.
oftentimes that doesn't always happen, at that sort of ideal timely manner, right?
Yeah, it's true. And I mean this structure specifically was a little bit different because it was Showcase in Canada on the acquisition side, and then it was also Netflix on the acquisition side. And so we didn't ever really actually have a studio breathing down our neck. Brad was the
Mm.
studio. Brad and Peacock Alley Entertainment, Carrie Mudd, and so they were driving the bus, and they were like, okay, well, we have a little bit of money. Let's open up a writer's room early and get ideas generating so that when we get the official green light, we already know what the first half of the season is going to be. And then we can just fill those details in. But Travelers was great. It ended, and since then I've worked in other like mini writers' rooms, a handful of those, and often with Brad. But then the pandemic changed everything.